Here's a question I'd like to share with the panel. What to do? My son acted in this lifestyle and now is in the beginning stages of HIV and is extremely depressed. Where do I go for help as a parent? Thoughts?
What does this mother know about her son's network, the support? How involved is she in talking with him? What does she know about his feelings? So many questions I would like to know in order to give good advice.
There is a lot.
There's the health aspect where she's going to want to learn, or he or she, a parent, is going to want to learn everything they can about, the medical aspects of this, and there's a lot of resources there. We have a page on this at North Star which has some pointers to others, but it really goes down to the support, and it ties into the last question. The problem with gossip isn't that people know too much who are gossiping, it's that they know too little, and it's just taken out of that context, and so he or she and the son are going to need to find people who can understand or are capable of understanding. So when we talk about who to talk to about this, it's not who should know, but who is capable of really understanding this in the most complete way possible. And there's a lot of people who can. At North Star, again, we have a support group just for HIV positive people, and we have a lot of that is something that she's going to need a lot of support for.
In other words, network. Keep reaching out. There are people who can help support us in these things, and we do need to reach out so that we, as many have mentioned, we don't do this in isolation. Justin.
Lily, could you read the question one more time again? I have a thought, but I just want to hear the question.
I don't know if I can find it.
Okay.
Here it is. My son acted out in this lifestyle and now is in the beginning stages of HIV, is very depressed. Where to go for help as a parent?
Yeah. Well, just the one, I think, the support has already been spoken to. The first place I want to go, hopefully, she would go to him. That would be, not necessarily for, to support her and how difficult it is.
But what can I do for you?
That they can come together. I think oftentimes with something like that, there's a tendency, with a difficult situation, there's a tendency to not want to feel the pain, not want to feel the hurt that could potentially come with that. And so to disconnect from something that's difficult. And so the first place I would encourage her to go is directly to her son and to really connect and be together in that struggle together.
Thank you. Here's a question we should discuss. My brother and I are both active members struggling with strong same-sex attraction. It is really hard on my mother. What can I do to help her come to a resolution? What do you want parents to know?
I would just want my parents to know, if they were here, that I don't blame them. I don't blame them for anything. If I lied, I wasn't trying to lie. I was trying to figure myself out. I was confused. I didn't even know who I was. Those aspects of me don't represent who I really am. And I don't blame them for anything, and that I need them now more than ever. So even if my parents felt that they maybe weren't as supportive in the past, and maybe somewhere there's some shame and guilt that they wish they would have done more, I would just say, well, I need you now, so forget it. Let's go. That's what I would tell a mom who is struggling. Like, let's not dwell on mistakes we made or things we could have done different to maybe prevent this, because you'll never know. It's not your fault. It's circumstance in whatever variety or combination that it can occur. And so you just have to move on from that point and love and work together.
Thank you, Kelly. Nobody gets perfect parents, as we're well aware, especially if we are parents. I've often said that the product of parenting is not the child. The product of parenting is the parent. we just need to keep trying to learn and figure out and not focus so much on the mistakes we make, but trying to correct them. I thought it was a nice statement, Kayla. I appreciate that. And I think you speak for a lot of us, all of us who would worry about parents' feelings, that we can get past that in a hurry. Here's a question.
Very briefly on that,
Oh,
Lily.
sure.
I don't see anything wrong with parents saying to their kids, hey, have you thought about counseling? And I don't see anything wrong with kids saying to their parents, hey, have you thought about counseling? Because
Nice.
if this is mom's issue, it's not the two sons' job to fix that for mom. And I hear the concern, and I get that. I relate to that. My mom had counseling all while I was putting my wife through hell, and that was really good for her. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, Mom, we're doing great. Maybe, here's a few names,
Mm-hmm. It is. It's typically guilt that gets in the way of good parenting. It's better to just work on things. Here's a question. Have you ever had any strong opinions or beliefs about same-sex attraction that have radically changed? That's a good question.
I'll say yes to that. Growing up and not being gay and not and trying to do everything I could to sacrifice and live in every way possible. I originally, when I was younger, thought it was a matter of doing the Abrahamic sacrifice and giving your life to God and letting Him make something of it, and that just made sense to me until I got to know gay people. That's the typical story, isn't it? And finding out that their struggle is a little bit different, that it doesn't just come from a pathological place, something to get rid of, but that it actually informs the best parts of them, then it became something different altogether. The paradigm shifted tremendously.
Someone asked me to repeat the question. Let me read it one more time. Whoops, I skipped. Have you ever had any strong opinions or beliefs about same-sex attraction that have radically changed?
So one that's changed for me, I think, and this, I think Ty may have alluded to this a little bit in the first panel, but I used to hold a belief that you shouldn't act on same-sex attraction, and I think you should act on same-sex attraction. I think that's the only way forward, is to act. It just depends on how you act, and if you act in accordance with gospel principles or not. And so I think the very, the fact that someone experiences an attraction to the same sex requires action. And it's just acting on it in ways that are in harmony with gospel principles that will lead to peace and happiness.
Hear, hear.
Thank you.
Lily, may I comment on that one?
Please.
It's changed for me. Like, when I was 6 years old, I had my first attraction to a female. I didn't understand what that was, right? So then in high school, I start to have those feelings again, and I'm like, oh, that seems familiar to this little time when I was 6 and these other times through elementary school or junior high. Well, then I leave the church, so then that means something completely different at that point, right? Well, when I returned to the church, initially I thought, I will never be able to get married. This is going to be a completely celibate decision. That was my decision. That's what I really believed. Then that changed. A year and a half into being active, I started dating a guy. I thought, actually, I'm really attracted to him, so maybe it's just going to go away. And I think I wanted to believe that so bad because it would make people around me feel more comfortable, that I grasped onto that you know what? The atonement is just going to take this away from me. It's going to be completely gone. I don't have to worry about. Well, as soon as I did that, there went my shield. And I learned that, you know what? This is still a part of me, and it's not going away. And somehow, through all of that, I feel even more whole, more complete than I ever did before, by just realizing that, you know what? This is a part of me, and it's not the biggest part of me, it's not the best part of me, it's not the worst part of me, but it's a lot of parts of me. And I actually really love it. It somehow makes me unique, and it allows me to help others, but most importantly, it allows me to be closer to my Savior. So how grateful am I that it's not going away? But I think that would be my transition. It's changed multiple times, and for every single person it's different. But I would caution you to not think that it's gone, because it might surprise you. So that's my experience, and I'm actually really grateful for this, and I know a lot of other people who've come to the Lord can agree with that to some extent.
Thank you, Kayla. Any other comments? I know I'm jumping ahead. Aaron, we haven't heard much from you. Will you forgive me if I ask you to share anything you'd like to on any of these topics or another one?
Whoa, pressure's on. A couple of things that I have thought of throughout the panel was Brene Brown. She's a researcher, and I just have dabbled into some of her reading just a little bit, so I don't know much, and maybe somebody else can help me talk a little bit more about her. But she works a lot about on shame, and so I just wanted to say her name to have people go and read her literature. She talks about love and connection and talking to people about some of the things that you're ashamed of. And, I can relate, maybe not in dealing with the same-sex attraction, but having my own shame as being a young mom or whatever, feeling the mom guilt or the mean girl talk that I talk to myself. And so that's some of the stuff that I've been working on, is just kind of talking to people about my shame and finding healthy people to talk to about my shame. And so I second what people talk about in regards to talking to people about it and finding healthy people. And then the other thing I was thinking about was we were talking about judgments and condemnations, and I was thinking that, about the stories that I tell myself and my own judgments that I have on our relationship. Danny being SSA and me being OSA, I guess. Or I have my own judgments on what people perceive us. I have my own judgments. Our Voices of Hope video went out, and just the stories I told myself. What are they thinking about us? What do they think about this aspect of our lives? Well, all these stories I was telling myself, and so. I had to work through that, and I had to process it, and I'm still processing it, but I'm learning that it doesn't matter what people think, and just kind of working on my own judgments. I don't know.
So I think just really, if you're a spouse or a parent or a friend supporting, that we all have to look at ourselves and look at our own stuff. And sometimes the best way to help somebody is to get healthy ourselves, and to understand ourselves better so that we can be in a good place to be a support. And I think that goes for everyone. I really think that's kind of what you were.
Thank you. This is why I handed it to him. You got me going again.
You guys make a good team.
Yeah, we do. So for the first couple of years, it was, this is Danny's issue, and I just kind of sat on the sidelines, and I just kind of rode the train, I guess. And then I realized, wow, Danny's getting really healthy, and I'm causing a lot of trauma to our relationship. And
It's that OSA.
I guess. And and so I finally started working on myself, and I started to go to my own therapist, and I started to work on our relationships, and I feel like we've come. I mean, this is just maybe a year ago that I started really working on myself. And I feel like I said when I first introduced ourselves, that we've come a long way, and we still have a long way to go. But I was just talking to Danny just the other day about some trauma that had happened in our lives a couple of years ago, and how, wow, we were really unhealthy. That was some really victim, or wow, you were really rescuing me. And anyway, we've come a long way, and so I tell my family this a lot, almost every time I tell them that everyone would benefit in therapy or reading some books, and that everybody should go to therapy.
Here's a question. What advice do you have for someone with SSA for whom marriage doesn't seem to be an option?
No advice, but I'd like to hear it, because I've got a daughter who's of age. She wishes she were married, and she may never be, so it's pretty appropriate in a lot of other areas.
Before I was married, the first time, I remember
I had this strong desire to be married, and it was something I worked for, and it was kind of seen as something that, just the end goal. After I was divorced, took a lot of time to really figure things out. I kind of shut down for a while, actually. I shut down for about 2 years and didn't want to even think about anything, which isn't helpful. Don't do that. But now I kind of look towards it, and I don't know exactly what the path is or where I'm headed, but I'm kind of working on myself and trying to figure it out. And I've realized as I do that, that desire starts to get back, but it's more of a healthy desire. I'm looking, and it's not something where I'm actively searching it, but who knows what'll happen. I don't know that it matters, one way or another, whatever. As long as I'm following the gospel, that's what matters to me right now.
I like that. And Elder Wickman and Elder Oaks were in an interview that's posted in the LDS newsroom, in case you aren't aware of that. And that question came up, and Elder Oaks said there are a lot of people in this life that don't marry. And that doesn't prevent us from working on our own path of progression, as Matt was talking about, and being healthy ourselves and moving forward. And it's too early in any point of our life to say, I'll never or always. Things change in life, so we may not know how we'll feel further down the road, but we do know that there are many who won't marry in this life, who, if they're worthy, will be given opportunities to find a partner during that 1,000 years of the millennial time.
Can I say that through my marriage and through working on my marriage with the SSA, I've come to learn, and still learning and still realizing, that my marriage is not any different than any other marriage. This is just the experience that we're experiencing in my marriage, and as I see and as I become friends with or talk to other people in their marriages, they've got their issues. Everybody's got an issue. You go to church or wherever you are and you look at people and you go, oh, they have it. They're perfect, whatever. I don't do that. I go to church and I look at someone and I go, what is their stuff? Because they've got it. Seriously, I look at people. There's someone in my bishopric. I go and I'm like, I really want to know what their stuff is, because they've got it and I just can't figure it out. So really, just because of this one issue, everybody's got something. And as I've continuing on this journey, it's just how you respond, and how we respond, and working together, and
Nice.
just that response of how you react to it.
It has been said that what our lives are made up 10% of what happens to us, and 90% our response to it. I think that's something to think about.
Yeah.
I don't know about the percentages, but it certainly impacts the thought. I like what you said.
Could I jump in there for just a second?
Yes, Jeff.
It's what you were saying, Lily, with the never. I always think it's sad when we carry that burden. I will never have that. And I speak from personal experience. There were a good 8 years when I said to myself, I will never get married. And I was mistaken in my case. I can't say if anyone else is, I can't say that just because I was mistaken. There will be people who won't get married. I remember a friend of mine said, could you believe it? I'm engaged. I said, yeah, I could believe you're engaged. What I can't believe is I'll ever be engaged. And so I know there's people sitting in the audience who say that. And I'd say, look around, like Linnell was saying. There's a lot of screwed up marriages. Have you ever met somebody?
We don't know what you mean, Jeff. We don't know.
Have you ever met a couple and gone, wow, how did you guys ever get married? Or you met somebody and be like, you're married? You pulled it off? I, as a single guy, had this idea that I'm down here, and as soon as I can get up here, then I'll be married. And there's some truth to that. I think love comes to us when we're ready for it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there's so much we have to do, and there's so much we have to offer. And I think, for me at least, the sadness and the grief that I dealt with of not being married came from something even deeper, which was I didn't feel like my life had purpose or meaning. And I remember kneeling down one day after one of my many bad blind dates, saying, and I'd gone from that to hanging out with my nephews and my sister and her husband, and seeing how wonderful that family was for them, and those never gonna happen to me came in, and I kneeled down and I said, I just want my life to have meaning like theirs. I want my life to have purpose like theirs. And the Spirit came back to me really strong and said, Jeff, you're not the one that decides how your life has meaning. You're not the one that's going to make your life meaningful. If you put your hand in mine and you do my will, no matter what happens, no matter where you go, whether that's marriage or not, I will be with you and I will make sure your life has meaning. And that's what brings us meaning, and that's what brings us purpose.
Putting our hand in the Lord's. That's it. Thanks, Jeff. Here's a sad question. I have spoken to my bishop about same-sex attraction and a confession, and he is unwilling to put any effort into learning about SSA or anything that I'm dealing with. I told him I felt like in my elders' quorum, I felt like I was on an elevator with strangers. He doesn't seem to care about anything but doing the bare minimum for his calling. My problem is that I don't feel welcomed or even want to go to church. Besides going to the stake president, what can I do? Any thoughts? I'll begin by saying, I remember hearing one woman say something I really liked. She said, I go to sacrament meeting to take the sacrament, and the rest of the time that I'm in church, I'm there to find somebody else to serve. And I really appreciated that. I thought, church meetings can be really lonely if we're there waiting for a friend. Some wards do better than others. I think we know that if we've been in more than one ward. Sometimes there are wards that really take us in. Sometimes there are wards that really don't. And it can be true of priesthood leaders too. I want the panel to respond on this, but I think we keep looking because there are people who understand. There are people who are willing to learn. And if you need to go to your stake president, go to your stake president. If you need to go to a counselor in the bishopric, maybe reach out to one of the counselors in the bishopric, or somebody in your elders quorum presidency, or your home teacher if that's a receptive soul. And if not, keep looking. Keep looking. There is help. God wants us to get the help we need. We need to keep looking. Some people will fail us, but some people won't. And ultimately, we'll find that help if we keep seeking earnestly. I remember that J. Golden Kimball, that was a colorful fellow, but this doesn't include one of his colorful metaphors. He actually said that in one occasion he said, some people are called into leadership positions so that they can bless, and others are called into those positions so that they can be tested. Let's keep looking for help. It's there. Matt.
I remember talking to one bishop, and I went and explained my whole story to him, and he just
keep
sat
the mic
there.
close.
He just sat there and looked at me with this, blank face, had no idea what to do, and he just said, "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" And and it's like, yeah, there have been times where I've had bishops that have been absolutely amazing and have helped me along, and others where they had no idea what to do, and you're exactly right. You look for other people that can help.
Well, and I would just want to jump in, and I hope that if there are bishops that say that you can have an answer, that you can help them. When they say, I don't know what to do, what are you talking about? I'm clueless. Well, I'll help you. We'll figure this out together. Building a relationship with a bishop, with a priesthood leader, someone in your ward, a church leader, it's not just about, I know that you may be going to get a certain need met and get help and support. And I think at the same time, you can also be offering a great service, a loving service, by just hanging in there and figuring it out together with that leader. And so you may have to do some supporting at the same time while you're receiving support, but just think of what that gives to the next person that goes in and talks with that leader.
Craig, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think sometimes we erroneously think that every experience like this is going to be wonderful, that there's going to be, choir singing in the background and tears and all that. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, that's not life. Sometimes you expect answer A and you don't get an answer. Sometimes you get answer B. Sometimes there's a delay. It's all part of the process, really, of trying to become the kind of people that we should become. We read a quote from C.S. Lewis that said, "We want a God that gives us what we want. fortunately, we have a God that gives us what we need to become like He is. And it's sometimes what we need or what happens to us can actually minister to our ability to become better. So I think of my work. Sometimes my boss says really hard things to me that if I wanted to be upset, I could be upset. But if I think about what's at the bottom of what I heard, what's at the base that's driving the comment, what can I learn from this? There's always something. And God, being who He is, can take whatever happens and turn it to our good if we're willing to go there. But we have to be able to get past the initial shock. Well, there's no angels and nobody cried, and it's just, we have to be able to move past that.
Sometimes it doesn't look like what we want it to look like, but it doesn't mean that God's hand isn't in our lives when we invite Him there. We are going to wrap up this pretty quickly, but President, I know you want to say something. What would you like to say?
I was just going to say, as a stake president, I would love to hear from that member. And if this confidence is, well, I'll try with that bishop, I'll try with that bishop, I'll try with that bishop, and if I'm aware that the trying is going on, I can help guide the bishop as he works with you, and you can share with the stake president what you're trying, and you can counsel together to benefit and bless that bishop. I testify. I had a case down in Arizona where I got a request from a stake member, and his sister wasn't received well by the bishop, military bishop, not very cold, very cold, prickly, not a warm, loving bishop. But I watched that for 6 to 8 months as I worked with my member, and I did talk with that stake president. We saw a wonderful miracle happen where eventually there's this bond between that military bishop and this sister who was coming back into activity, and it was an amazing process to watch the bishop get blessed, that member get blessed, and then my stake member get blessed. And I tried to stay out of it, but yet I got involved enough to have that stake president be aware. So I think that the church's government, it's a process whereby through priesthood, we strengthen one another. There are checks and balances. We always have up and down, side to side checks and balances. So as a stake president, meet with me. Then I'm aware of what's going on with that bishop, and I can support the bishop, and you can support the bishop. And in the end, we all have a gift. We've been given this for a reason. I'm convinced of it. So I think as we focus outward, it's not just about us. It's about how do we minister and help others. Then our burden becomes much lighter as we're engaged in blessing the lives of others. Then inspiration flows faster than when we're focused on ourselves and our woes. That's been my experience.
Thank you. I will add that some people have, I think, with great wisdom said that happiness equals reality minus expectations. And I think we have to be careful about our expectations. In any sensitive subject, people may or may not react very well. And our expectations is something that we can control to an extent and realize that there's a steep learning curve, and if your expectations are very low, you can only be pleasantly surprised. And that can be a help when we're working with other people who may not understand our situation. Thank you so much for your participation. Now, I know there were several answers that came in that we didn't get to, but part of what we're doing today is showing that there are a lot of different resources. You've seen some of these booths, and take some more time and look around and talk to people. There are websites where you can send in questions and connect with somebody who is going to be able to respond to you in a way that we hope will be helpful, because we don't want you to go away completely disappointed if we didn't get to your question. Keep asking. Find one of these resources or our websites to communicate and get your questions responded to. We're going to be taking a 15-minute break. We hope that you'll visit the resource booths and take some time and visit, and we'll convene back here at 3:30. Do you need to make another? 3:30. That's the announcement. 3:30 back here. Thank you. Let's begin by having each panel member introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your experience with this subject, or however you would like to begin. Ty, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so I already introduced myself earlier when my wife and I were on the first panel. Ty Mansfield. To introduce the part of it that's more relevant to this, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I went back to school a few years ago. I finished up I did my master's program at a little Christian university called Abilene Christian University in Texas in marriage and family therapy, and I'm just in the process of finishing up my doctorate in marriage and family as well. And my wife and I just moved back to Utah, where I've been doing a little bit of teaching as well.
My name is Scott Peterson, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker as well as a certified sex addiction therapist. I'm with the Lifestyle Network, and we deal with pornography addiction as well as other addictive behaviors, compulsively sexual behaviors. And I'm here because there is a commonality between sex addiction and the eroticization of same-gender attraction.
I'm David Matheson. I just finished a book which is over there for sale on a special conference discount. That's my life story. No, I grew up experiencing same-sex attraction, and at about 23 years ago, I started my own journey trying to deal with or shift or change or whatever. I'm 28 years into a happy marriage, happy now. And I'm a therapist. I've been doing therapy with men with unwanted homoerotic desires and same-sex attraction and trauma and everything else for about 17 years.
John Livingston. John Livingston. I am a Canadian born and raised. How about that? There you go. Do we have any other fellow Canadians here who will admit it? Oh, bless your soul. I am one of the religion professors at BYU. My doctorate is in counseling psychology. I was in private practice for many years up in Canada. I'm actually licensed up in Canada, have not licensed down here. I serve on the board of the Foundation for Attraction Research, been involved with AMCAP for many years. I don't have a particular expertise or interest in the area of same-sex attraction, although I've certainly seen and talked with a significant number of people, both as a professional and as a priesthood leader.
I'm Shirley Cox, and I'm on the FAR board with John. I teach at BYU in the social work school. My doctorate's in social work. Been working with this population probably 40 plus years, which tells you a little bit about how old I am. But I began work with this in Las Vegas when I was at UNLV for 8 years, and then I've been at BYU about 20 years now.
I'm Richard Williams. I'm the only one here who is not a therapist. I'm here, I guess, because I have this naive belief that therapy will be most effective when the client and the therapist evolve a story, a metaphor, a discourse, a language that they both can agree in which the problem can be experienced and addressed, and that it will be even more effective if that story happens to be true. And so my interests are not particularly in same-sex attraction, though I've thought about it and been involved with thinking about it and talking about it over the years. But a lot of the criticisms, from my point of view, are more systemic. That is, the way we talk about it, the way we experience, the way we think about it makes a big difference. And if we're going to make progress on it, it may require some radical rethinking, retalking, deriving other metaphors. And so maybe I'm just the color man on this broadcast team.
Thank you for those introductions. We will be inviting questions in a little bit, so be thinking about that. We're going to open that up still in a few minutes, Al. But first, we want to talk to the panel about the concept of change. What does it mean? What does it not mean as related to same-sex attraction?
I'm going to jump right on this one really fast. Having grown up in this whole movement over the last 23 years, so starting 23 years ago and being heavily involved in this all the way through from then till now, first just as a man going through my own stuff and now as a therapist, I've seen the term change be considered and reconsidered and reconsidered time and again. And so change used to mean shift from homosexual to heterosexual. That used to be what we meant when we said change. You can change, people can change. And the backlash against that has been severe, and it's been from gay advocacy, but it's also been from within our own ranks. And I think probably most of us who have experienced change, which I have, would not say that the change that we experienced is that change. In other words, I would not say that I was 100% homosexual, I'm now 100% heterosexual. And so as I look at what change means, I think about growth, I think about shifts in a whole variety of areas. As a therapist, I think about, therapy is all about change. The gospel of Jesus Christ is all about change. And all of that change is not about gay to straight. And I believe we do ourselves a big disservice if we continue thinking about change as being from gay as a whole thing to straight as a whole thing, and that if I'm going to go to therapy, it's only because I need to change from gay to straight, as opposed to I need to grow, I need to heal, I need to recover from trauma, etc.
I'd like to say, as I think about change, I kind of follow along with what David said, but certain things don't ever change, and I try to help my clients understand that. You are, you were, you will be forever a child of God, and that doesn't change. The Lord loves each one of us. That's not going to change. Nothing we do is going to change that. But there are things that do change, and one of the reasons I'm a therapist is, like David said, therapy is all about change, but it's about a change of heart. It's about gaining of hope. It's about gaining peace in your life, moving from pain to joy. Those are good changes, and I think that's what we're all seeking, is to become closer to the Lord, so that we'll gain that change to come back into His presence in a different way, but nevertheless back to be with Him.
I'd like to hear from the rest of you on this
I
subject.
wonder if I might look at change in a slightly different way. We know from brain studies that for most of us, the left side of our brain is where we do our processing, analyzing, figuring things out, math, etc. Right side of our brains is basically mood, emotion, etc. And it's not necessarily true for absolutely everybody, but it's pretty well that way. We know from brain injury studies. We can change our thinking quickly. I can say, think of the bathroom back at home, think of your parents' car, think of and boom, 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 boom. We can change our thoughts almost immediately. We can change our behavior. Everybody stand up, everybody sit down, everybody da-da-da. But when it comes to changing our feelings, that is quite a different matter. Okay, everybody be happy, be sad. Okay, feel betrayed, you there? Okay, whoa, that just doesn't quite go like that. And because of the issue that we're dealing with and the way people really feel, we can't really say, well, change the way you feel. That doesn't really work. But when we do change our thinking and when we change our behavior, pretty soon our feelings will follow. Repentance is change, and that's the way that goes. In any case, we'll probably talk more a little bit later about that. But I'd just like to insert that into the discussion.
I guess my perspective might be a little bit different on this. I think that there's a sense in which I agree with what everyone has said. I can think of some ways in which change in feelings happens very quickly. For example, if I need to be picked up at work, my wife, who's in the audience, she never is, but she might be late. And I need to get home, and she's 15 minutes late. And she's always late. I don't know what she's doing. Now she's 30 minutes late, and I'm getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And it's just, I don't even know why I try to make this work. I can work myself into some pretty strong feelings, and then someone comes up and says, oh, by the way, she just had an accident. How long does it take for those feelings to change? Just instantaneously. So for me, I guess I'm pretty much Heraclitean on this. You never step in the same stream twice. I believe that feelings as well as thoughts as well as behaviors are all in a really radical sense things we're doing. And because they're things we're doing, not deliberately, not as a matter of conscious choice, but nonetheless it's what we're doing. And we can change what we're doing for any one of a number of reasons, and so we evaluate whether that change is effective. So if we were categories of people or categories of things, it might be hard to change categories, or If we were a bundle of qualities, it might be hard to, I'll swap you some anger for some grace or something like that. Change would be very difficult. But if all of those things are radically something I'm doing, then I think change is a pretty normal thing. And it can go pretty deep because what I'm doing runs pretty deep. So I guess I'm going to probably,
Bring out another
it's good I'm
side.
on the end of this line, I guess. I don't know.
Let me, here come the professors. We're all going to start splitting hairs here. Can I suggest that there's a difference between feelings and emotions? What? Yeah. Yeah. Let me suggest that, if someone stepped into the hall here and fired a shotgun blast into the ceiling, we would not think about our shock. We would immediately be shocked, and there'd be some reaction to that. If I'm standing here talking, someone's making gestures, I suddenly realize my zipper's open. Oh, darn, I hate that, I'm embarrassed. If someone important to me says something mean to me, I may feel hurt. And the more important the person is to me, the more I hurt. I'm going down the street, somebody's shrieking, "You freaking da-da-da-da-da," and I look and I don't recognize them, well, I just keep going. If I look and it's my mother, that's not good. Yeah. Frustration, another good example of a feeling, and worry. If you've got a 16-year-old daughter and it's 1:30 in the morning and she's out with Joe, tall, dark, and wonderful, or Josephine, tall, dark, anyway, you get my point. You're suddenly worried about, car accidents and sex and babies and things like that. And can I suggest that that's what feelings are like? Here comes my hair splitting. I'm going to suggest that some things we actually decide on. If you went out tonight and your car had a big old gunch in the door, and some teenagers doing donuts in a rusty Camaro, you look at the door, you look at the kid, you start marching over in that direction, and somebody says, excuse me, you turn around and it's, I don't know, Elder Holland, yeah. I'm sorry, I just backed into your car door. Ooh. Well, emotions, I'm going to suggest, yep, we turn on and off and we change them all the time. So that anger is an emotion, hate is an emotion, jealousy is an emotion. But feelings that just have those immediate reactions, anyway, I'm going to suggest they don't change quite so quickly.
Let's bring this right back to SSA.
Oh, darn.
How much can we change? How much can we not change? I mean, we do know it's a gospel of change. Life is change. I can never remember if it's Ben Franklin or Lincoln who said, when you're finished changing, you're finished. And there's some truth to that, isn't there? Life is about change. We need to respond and grow and become. How much can we expect? And a moment ago, I talked about expectations not being too high is often healthy, but what do we think with this? We haven't heard from you, Ty. What do you think?
I've been sitting here thinking that I'm thinking about totally different things. At the end of the day, I think sometimes I don't like the conversation that we have culturally around same-sex attraction. And I mentioned earlier that I really dislike the term same-sex attraction because it becomes meaningless in this context. And I think the idea of straight becomes meaningless in this context. And the idea of gay becomes meaningless in this context. Because there are so many, I'm kind of a deconstructionist at heart, and I think we really have to understand on a deeper level the nuances of what we're talking about, feelings from emotions, from cognitions, and to even kind of zoom out a little bit. And this is framed the way that I approach therapy, it's the way that I approach my life. Knowledge is a precursor to power. The less conscious I am, and actually David made a comment recently in something that he wrote about how the importance of consciousness and self-awareness. And I'm surprised, and for a long time I'm surprised at how often, and I actually work with this, with same-sex attraction informs my therapy, but most of the clients that I actually see or have seen for the last several years, this is not their issue. I work with a lot of those screwed up heterosexuals that we talked about earlier. And so are heterosexual marriages.
Job security.
Right.
Well, into the millennium.
There's just not enough SSA folks out there. We need to focus on the screwed up heterosexuals. So, but it informs the work that I do. But most of what I have done has not been with individuals who experience same-sex attraction. But the idea of, I forgot where it's going with that, but the idea of working with folks and knowledge being power, like I'm surprised at how many adults are really immature adolescents in adult bodies and are not very self-aware. And so I'm not talking about SSA, I'm talking about adults. And I think so much of becoming mature humans, one of my favorite authors is named David Rico, and he wrote a book called How to Be an Adult, right? And I had this client, an adult woman who came to me after I had her read this book, and she came back, and she's got kids who are graduated from high school, and she's in tears, and she says, I realized that I've never been in an adult relationship in my entire life. And so there's this idea, like as humans, becoming knowledgeable, becoming aware, becoming conscious of our experience in an educated way, in a knowledgeable way, is a precursor to having power over our experience. And so what change means to me, to come back to your question, is I want to understand myself. Another good book that I really like is called The Language of Emotion. Different emotions, if we were to even talk about emotions as distinct from feelings, different emotions speak different things. Fear is usually about self-protection. Sadness is usually about loss. And when I have a client come to me and say, I feel bad, well, bad is not a feeling. Bad is a judgment, right? If I understand that what I'm calling bad, if it's fear, I need to respond to fear differently than I'm going to respond to sadness. And so I need to have a more intelligent and conscious awareness about my own experience, about what I'm feeling, and that will never happen, or I will never have power over my experience unless I understand my experience. And so the therapeutic experience for me and change is first about coming into that place of consciousness and awareness, self-exploration, really thinking about the things that I'm most afraid of about myself. And then I have to befriend it. And then from that place of, I'm a firm believer that you don't have a right to try to change anybody until you love them. And I think that is also true about us. I shouldn't be trying to change anything about me until I can really love me first. I need to love me where I am and love me as I am. And then I'm coming from a very different place when I try to change things, whether it's my distorted cognitions or my chaotic emotions or my stories, my narratives, whatever it is. And so change, when we talk about change, there are so many more nuanced sub-questions of that. I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but there are a lot more nuanced questions to ask as a part of this really big umbrella question.
And many people out there may be wondering at this point, yeah, but how much do feelings of attraction to others of the same sex change? Okay, because I think a lot of people come here wondering that question. I'm going to answer that question in the only really authentic way I can, which is from my own life experience. I could answer it in a therapeutic sense and say, the clients that I work with report, blah, 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 but I'm not going to do that. My own life experience, 20 years ago, my interactions with other men would have been marked by feelings of inferiority, detachment and fear, and shame on one side. On the other side, and as a result, or coming out of that, they would have been marked by envy, perhaps hatred, though it may have been veiled hatred, envy, attraction in a sexual sense, and lust. The behaviors that would have come out of that would have been withdrawal and isolation, fantasy, masturbation, thinking about attractive men, and at some point along the last 20 years, the use of pornography. So that was that would have been the nature of my experience of same-sex attraction and homoeroticism, which are two very different things, okay? Today, my experience with other men is not like that really in any way. I would experience feelings of usually confidence. Some men are still intimidating to me, but I don't see that as being pathological or problematic. There's no shame about it. I experience a sense of connection and comradeship. I mean, even men that are just so different from me, I'll look at a man like in the airport or whatever, and I'll just say, you know what, I get you. I get you. There's something about you, I get it, right? Maybe he's a dad, maybe he's my age, or maybe he's a Harley rider. I don't know what he is, but there's something in me that just gets him from experiences that I've had. So instead of lust, and instead of, certainly there's no enmity. Okay, there's probably still a little bit, but has nothing to do with it's just the fall of man. I still have, I'm still not perfect, and so I sometimes get, upset with people. But it's not that isolation. It's not that I'm so different, I can't identify, I can't understand you. There's not going to be lust. There's not going to be sexualizing of him. If he's really beautiful, I will probably have a reaction of delight and joy, but not the idolatrous delight of, oh, he is so hot, but rather the sense of, look at what God created in him. That is beautiful. And I might just look at him and just go, what a beautiful creation. And so I'm worshiping the Creator, not the creation. So that's change. That's change in my life. And it's really substantial, and it feels markedly different for me.
I'm going to mention something in this too. As a therapist, I work with people all the time who are afraid that their feelings or their emotions can't change. Some have gone through really difficult marriage times, and they're really hurt and angry at their partner. And as they're moving through their process, if the partner is willing to change, sometimes they've needed reassurance. Can I ever love this person again? Can I ever feel what I felt? And, I don't make promises that I can't keep, but I do say, yeah. I'm like, yeah. Feelings can change. And in fact, I remember one distinct case where really seriously, it was a month later that a woman came back in and said, I would never have believed I could feel the way I feel. She said, a month ago, I didn't believe it when you told me feelings could change. Now I believe it. I think it's important to have hope. I think that we do have a gospel of hope. It is a gospel of change. Things change all the time. It's hard to see it when we're in the middle of it. When we're in the middle of it, it's our truth. But it's not the truth. The truth really does set us free. And as we learn and inform our understanding of ourselves and life and the gospel and the connections we can have with the Spirit and inform our knowledge of the atonement, we start to feel this hope that grows, that I don't have to stay where I am right now. No matter where that place is, I don't have to stay here. For good or ill, I need to keep choosing. I need to keep learning. I need to keep becoming. And things change dramatically. Some of you are very young. I'm not so young anymore. And let me tell you, the wheel turns. Things can change. We can choose the change in our lives and then let it happen and have the hope that life changes and can change for good if we turn to the truth and turn to resources that can help us understand ourselves and better understand that truth. Have to throw that in. Things change all the time, but it does take time. And I'm also going to say this, that if change were really easy, everybody would do it. but a lot of people don't. A lot of people stay where they are, and that's why some people will say in our world, nobody can change. And they believe that because they've known people who don't change. That's also true. It's where we put ourselves, it's what we expose ourselves to. The truth, I find this thinking this all the time when I'm with clients, the truth really does set us free. Coming to a better understanding of ourselves and our Heavenly Father and the relationship between us really can help us change. So specifically, I would say in a case like this, and I know we've been kind of theoretical in some fun ways, but behaviors, we know behaviors can change. We can establish patterns that are pretty tough to break, but not impossible. And if we act, what are some resources that you would suggest for changing behaviors to begin with? Like John was saying, we can start with behaviors and information, and then that can change our feelings if we change our behavior first.
Can I suggest that just doing some simple things like calendaring yourself a little bit so that you're in charge of kind of your life rather than life being in charge of you? Just doing something simple like that can make a significant difference in the way you feel about yourself. And I really believe that the way we feel about ourselves is essentially spiritual. We've got all kinds of terms, self-worth, self-concept, self. But I think it's essentially a spiritual thing.
And when you say calendaring, you're talking about specifically calendaring?
I'm talking really about a couple things. Number one, what am I doing today, tomorrow, the next day? What are my appointments? What are my obligations? Where do I need to be? And then number two, what are my priorities? What do I need to get done? Can I write those down? And can I prioritize them? Oh, this is an A item. This is a B, C, C. And then number them.
So give me some
this is what I'm
shape,
going to do
some
first.
shape
Yep.
to your
Just
days.
start
and
trying to
weeks.
take control of life.
I think that what Ty brought up is extremely important. We need to become more self-aware. We need to become more mindful of what we think and feel, and essentially create a meta process where we think and feel about what we're thinking and feeling. And so I know a lot of my clients, they will do a check-in with themselves on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times a day, where they'll ask themselves, what am I thinking right now? What am I feeling right now? Am I triggered right now by someone? And that process of becoming more self-aware then, in fact, engenders the process of change.
I like that. Richard?
Well, I think that's good advice. I think that to recommend how change comes about, you probably have to talk to everybody individually.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who don't change because they're always taking their temperature. They're always taking their emotional temperature. They're so self-focused, and within oneself, there's not a lot of room to change. So I think sometimes change comes about if you can get yourself oriented outward. Do something for somebody. For Latter-day Saints, put yourself somewhere where the Spirit can find you. Engage in some aspect that invites that and draws you out of yourself. We rattle around in ourselves enough. Something at some point has to draw us out of ourselves and show us that there are other things about us and about the world, it seems to me.
To come to this question of, with regard to same-sex attraction specifically, I think on some level helping clients take an inventory, because again, we're there's some overlap between some of the various panels and various themes and things that have been said. But as much as I want, sometimes it's not, again, with my comments earlier, we often SSA becomes this pathologized umbrella term, and everything underneath it is bad and we need to change it. And I think there needs to be lots of changes, and sometimes with what Justin was saying on the last panel, sometimes helping that what needs to change, taking an inventory of what is serving me or what is helping me move forward in my progression, and what is holding me back from my progression. And sometimes sometimes what I need to change is I need to be more assertive in acting on my attractions and acting and reaching out to men. And I said this before, it's become kind of a mantra that the only right way to respond to same-sex attraction is to act on it. I really hate the way that we talk about it. Just don't act on it. Because again, if we are to be gods, we have to become actors, but we also have to understand, what does that mean to act on it? And so I need to take an inventory. If I need to develop a deeper capacity for meaningful relationship in my life, because I've got a lot of emotional walls, I'm kind of shut down, there's been some trauma, I'm aversive in different relationships, I need to go and I need to work through those things so that I can develop a deeper capacity for relationship, for meaningful relationship, both men and women. And I think if we experience any aversion to intimacy with either sex, and I'm not using that as euphemism for sex, I mean that in the broadest sense, if I feel a sense of aversion to intimacy with either sex, then there's probably some trauma and some other issues I need to take a really deep look at. And because I'm not coming from neutral ground, and if I think my aversion to the opposite sex means that that's just proof that I'm gay, no, there's something else going on, and you're deluded is what it means. And so, or unconscious, I should say. That wasn't very kind, I'm sorry. It's unconscious.
Ty, I'm going to jump in just because a question came in that asked, what kind of trauma are you helping your clients with who feel SSA? And are there specific kinds of trauma that you have seen that have been associated with this? And that's a very broad question.
It's so broad, because I've worked with so many men in in a variety of settings, and David could speak to this too. I mean, there could be any kind of trauma if there's been any kind of abuse, and abuse takes there's a broad array of forms, and there's a spectrum of degree in those relationships. And again, so much of when people say something to the effect of, I know that I've been different. Well, often it's usually we're pretty good revisionists in the stories that we tell. I know that I'm gay because I felt different. I felt different for as long as I can remember, right? Well, how far back do you remember? Mm-hmm. And I remember. I mean, I've got a 2-year-old and an 8-month-old, and my 2.5-year-old. Like, he's not going to remember most of what's going on right now in our lives. And it's so interesting to watch this kind of human developmental process and what affects the way he feels and doesn't feel, and what he feels close to and doesn't feel close to. And there's certain ways that I interact with him that helps him, like where he really reaches out to me, and other times where, if I've been gone for 3 days, he's a little distant. And so there's just so many things on a human developmental spectrum, and I'm not pathologizing anything, I'm just saying from a human developmental perspective, there is so much that goes on subconsciously and pre-memory. Is that a word? Do we say that? An accurate way to say that? Precognition, pre-conscious memory. That there's so much that makes us complex as humans, that to say because I felt this, or because it's what I felt early on, I must have been born that way, and it must be genetic, and it must be predetermined. Like, that's just a really naive and unscientific way of talking about this. But yet the conversation around sexuality and pop culture is so lay and so superficial that we just keep playing into the pop cultural narratives. And because scientifically speaking, there's no such thing as gay and there's no such thing as straight. Those are interpretive paradigms and kind of cultural narratives that we impose in the way that we understand and experience and interpret what it is that we're feeling and what's going on, right? Because I've worked with different people who each identify as gay, and their substantive experience is each like qualitatively different. Right? There's not just one gay experience or one straight experience. Like, we're humans that have this like broad array of really complex and nuanced experiences in so many ways.
Shirley, you were going to say something.
I just wanted to interject too, that so often we don't really know if what we're struggling with is something that we even need to go see somebody about. And I think so many people that I deal with come in kind of in desperation, saying, I don't really know if I need to talk to you or not, but, and as soon as they say that, they need to talk to me, and I need to connect with them, and I need to hear what they're saying, and I need to let them play out with me what it is they're struggling with, because it's almost like in this telling of it, they start to discover a lot of, repressed or whatever material, but it's based on my ability as a therapist to really connect with them and really hear what it is they're wanting to share. Is that helpful?
And let me just interject here. We're making some assumptions maybe that should be stated, and that is that if you seek therapy, we're counseled very strongly, and Elder Oaks has made a very clear statement on this, to seek counselors who will help us in the context of the restored gospel. That if we're LDS and we have a desire to try to understand that part of our lives and embrace the gospel, then we need to be very careful about the therapists that we look for. In fact, I've told a lot of people looking for counselors, let the buyer beware. And if you don't feel like they understand the framework of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that's your goal, then find another counselor. I don't mean that there aren't a lot of good counselors who are out of the church, and I don't mean that there aren't a lot of bad counselors that are members of the church. You just need to be really selective and feel confident that this is a person who understands your framework and shares that desire for you to be able to be consistent in that way. Good counseling can be wonderful. Bad counseling can be terrible.
Can I just make a comment on the trauma? With veterans coming home from these wars, and we're seeing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, if any of us have experienced a significant amount of meanness, manipulation, abuse in our lives, wow, there is kind of an identifiable, trauma reaction to that sort of thing. If someone has been treated poorly by family, poorly by friends, poorly by their same-sex cohort, etc. There's probably some predictable feelings that will come from that, behaviors, etc.
And can I jump in, and just before you speak, Scott, or Dave, whoever is going to go next, that this, just so you know, is a panel of people who have a lot to share. There's really a lot of experience and knowledge and expertise up here. But I am going to ask them to keep their answers to about 1.5 minutes or 2 so that we can move around a lot. It's really easy to kind of get going in this subject, and they do have so much to share. I hope that you'll try to, break it up a little bit. Dave or Scott?
There's a psychologist by the name of David Brierley who talks a lot about trauma. And his research has shown that the most severe trauma that we can suffer is not that from war or a natural disaster or a car accident, but the trauma that's experienced in an interpersonal relationship. And so this trauma that we experience is more severe when we have a deeper relationship with somebody. And we have to remember too that if you are witness to trauma and not the primary recipient of trauma, you still have been traumatized.
What I want to add about trauma is, first of all, I don't think anyone here on this panel would intend to say that homosexuality is always caused by trauma, and definitely not that trauma always causes homosexuality. But those of us who have worked with individuals experiencing homosexuality would all say that there are many in this group who have experienced trauma, number one. Number two, with my last 45 seconds.
John's going to count you down there in a second if you're not careful.
That was horrible, by the way, when you were counting
John,
down
stop.
behind my back. The second thing is that when we grow up in an environment, we can become numb to the vibration of that environment. Often people that I work with will not realize the amount of trauma that they experience because, well, that's just how my dad was, or he was doing his best, or, well, the older boy who molested me, I enjoyed it, so was it trauma? So if you have if you're wondering inside yourself, was it trauma, I would encourage you to seek someone who can help you evaluate that.
That's a great point. There are a lot of questions coming in. Let's get to them. Okay, sorry, I'm going to start at the beginning here. This is an important question. What do you think about a homo-emotional relationship that resembles a homosexual relationship without the sex and within the constructs of the gospel? It depends on what that homo-emotional relationship is defined as.
Even really quickly, to define the human experience and the kinds and qualities of relationship that we have. You've got the homosocial, you've got homo-emotional, you got romantic, and then you got the sexual, and you got the spiritual. And when you think of David and Jonathan scripturally, they had a very deep intimacy in their relationship, an intimacy that culturally, we're kind of the ones that are weird, not what's going on.
Joseph and
scripturally.
Hiram have also been described
Joseph and
as
Hiram.
very close.
In Brigham Young, when he talked about the vision that he had of Joseph Smith as they were crossing the plains, he's like, I went and he kissed me on my cheek and put his hands on my face and kissed me on my cheek, and then he told me, whatever. So it's like this, we don't relate to each other like that anymore. A lot of the distortions and the problems are in our pop cultural, just the way that contemporary, we're just kind of weird about same-sex relationships. Men more than women. Women do it a little bit better, but men typically suck at it, I think. And so the idea of I can have a deep emotional, I think there's two questions here, because what I almost heard in the question was, can I have a gay relationship that's not sexual?
That's a good point.
And that's a problem, because it's kind of has this distorted narrative guiding the nature of the relationship. Can I have deep, meaningful, emotional intimacy with lots and lots and lots of men? Absolutely. Should I? Absolutely. But if I think I'm gonna have my one and only kind of gay partner which is not really sexual, and we're just gonna be together and fill each other's needs, that's gonna block our progression in other ways.
Exclusivity is what you're saying.
Yeah.
If it's exclusive, that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
It's not. Okay, I like that.
I was in a relationship like that a number of years ago, and it was a non-sexual, although honestly it pushed the boundaries, very intense relationship. And I'm going to be honest with you, there were aspects of that that were profoundly healing for me. And I thank God that it is over. Because it was such a mixed bag. Again, on the one hand, while I was in that relationship, my heterosexuality was probably at its all-time high. And yet, I realized in looking back how much the dark force was able to take my needle from here and take it over here, and then over here, and then over here. And had the relationship not ended, I think it would have been a very bad outcome. And so I am not endorsing that relationship. I'm not saying go and get yourself a guy like that. But I am going to say that in that phase of my life, there was something profoundly positive about that. And it came with a lot of danger.
Good points there, too. Here's another question. Why, this is a little bit, I'm afraid it's a rhetorical question. Why do all or most of the handouts today feature attractive, all-American guys? Yeah.
We know who our audience is.
Self-comparison is a struggle for most of us. Why?
Marketing is all about knowing your audience.
Why? Okay, anybody want to take a minute to respond? I mean, it is sort of rhetorical. I'm afraid this is the world we live in, right? But it sure can be frustrating sometimes.
Well, it's like a lot of what people relate to is what we're attracted often to what we relate to or what we desire or something like that. And so, I mean, I think that's marketing, period.
And can I say that this is not just exclusive to this issue either? I mean, there are a lot of people who struggle with body image or whatever because of what's marketed out there. And even photographers will tell us that the magazines won't accept even those anorexic models unless they do sculpting on Photoshop. So, I mean, we all struggle with some of these really impossible ideals that seem to be marketed. And I say ideals, quote unquote, because they shouldn't be, but
Can
it
I
is
just
difficult.
make a comment there,
it's
too?
difficult, yes.
We're focused on a particular topic here, but beauty has its own set of problems.
Mhm.
Wealth has its own set of problems. Intelligence has its own set of problems. Talent, etc.
May the Lord bless me with some of those problems.
we're in a sense, we're here discussing an aspect of human sexuality, which is a very thin slice of our lives. Yeah. Even if we were somehow happily involved, in marriage or whatever, really, how much of our lives is spent in sexual behavior? The only problem is it's just a sliver of our lives, but it's a sliver in the eye, because of where sexuality fits in terms of our ultimate eternal potential.
Here's a question. What things, this is another one of those really broad questions. What things should SSA people look for in spouses as far as psychological health? Again, let the buyer beware, folks, but go ahead. What would you say?
I think we have to be careful that we don't look to fulfill our needs by someone else doing that for us. I think the successful individuals that I've worked with that have moved from being very much involved in a gay lifestyle to a happy heterosexual marriage have really had to be pretty healthy themselves and on their way to being all together, I might say, before they really connect with someone else. And then it's kind of like the earlier panel said, you need to be careful that the person that you start dating and start linking with has problems that don't exacerbate your problems, that you can sort of help each other through that process, realizing that nobody's perfect and that we're all constantly evolving, but still they're not going to fix you and you can't fix them. It's how can you be there to support each other.
I would just add, as advice, pursue healthiness, pursue wholeness, and then be very conscious of who you're attracting and who you're attracted to. Because, and this was said earlier, the women, if you're a man, the member of the opposite sex who's attracted to you is attracted to what you're putting out. And if you're putting out wholeness, health, well-being, godliness, that's who you're going to draw to you. And if you start finding that all the chicks who dig you, are of a certain type, or all the guys who dig you are of a certain, then it's time to really look inward and do some more work.
Next question. How important is it to have our church leaders communicate with our therapists or vice versa?
Really.
Really important.
Is that fast enough?
Richard, as a church leader, how important is that to you?
Well, I've found that it depends a lot on the individual case, where we are, what we're talking about, the nature of the involvement of clergy. Some people that I've counseled with respond to that well. Some people don't respond to it so well. Sometimes if the problem is really deep or not deep at all, it just, to me, it's a very, very individual case, has been in my experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. As a therapist, when I work together with a bishop of an individual, because we have releases in place and that's the desire of the individual client, it has been a great experience. Often priesthood leaders who are open to supporting counseling really are great allies and resources and supports. So it has been beneficial in those cases to communicate with the priesthood leaders so that we're all on the same page and we can share information and save a lot of time and recreating the wheel every time, or reinventing the wheel.
Can I just add, if you're experiencing church disciplinary action, I consider it extremely important that your priesthood leader is communicating with your therapist.
It can be very helpful.
Because that process can be very helpful and very cleansing, but it can also be extremely traumatizing.
And as was mentioned in the previous panel, a question that came in about a less than sympathetic priesthood leader, and that might be very different then, and where some cases it may not be the best approach at that time if there isn't discipline involved. But thank you for those. Another, let's see, sorry, get on the right page here. As therapists and counselors have tried to support me, I've been preached at and talked to a lot. One of the most helpful and supportive ways in which my therapists have helped me is by admitting their own trials, weakness, and sharing their own experience with the atonement of Christ. How do you, as leaders and therapists, determine how personal and vulnerable you get as you counsel someone? It's an interesting question, given some ethical standards in therapy. Surely.
I think a real tip-off is if your therapist is saying, this is my experience and this is what you have to do. That just doesn't work that way. A therapist needs to listen to you, hear what your issues are, work with those, help you make decisions about what you want to do. And really, it's all about you. It's not about the therapist. So we need to be careful that that spotlight is on you and that you're not getting a lot of advice about what you should do with your life, because the only kind of counseling that will really work for you is if it's your agenda, your issues, your solutions, your choices about what you want to do. You don't want to move from one control situation to another.
I think, too, that appropriate self-disclosure from the therapist is a good thing. It can be something that can make him more human. But we have to make sure as therapists that we're not dealing with our own issues through our clients.
That's right.
That can result if we have too much self-disclosure.
At the end of some of my days, I go 10 hours of therapy and I don't feel any better. So,
I would just add something.
That's right.
briefly to
Let's
that.
make sure we're not your therapist is not the client. Ty?
Because the purpose of, I don't want to just even just add to Shirley's comment. When meaningful change will always come from the inside out. Sustainable, let me say that. Sustainable change will always happen from the inside out. It doesn't happen from the outside in.
That's right.
And if a therapist is there to try to, you don't go to a therapist to be changed by the therapist. I think the best therapy and the best therapists are those that really explore with the client their inner world, like their motivations, their realities, their feelings, their emotions, their values, and then in that exploration help them decide what they want, because otherwise it's not going to be sustainable. And if they don't want what maybe what you think is best for them, then I mean you're not going to change that for them. They have to want that. And so it's really getting in and exploring with them their inner world, and it's the therapeutic relationship always is about the client. And so from an ethical standpoint, if I'm disclosing anything that's about me, and I don't mean I'm disclosing something about me, but if I'm disclosing and it's about me, it's not about the client. I'm not disclosing this with healing intent for you. If I'm sharing something with you that's personal because I believe it might resonate with you or help you to understand, because sometimes I'll use metaphors from my own life experience to help kind of demonstrate or describe a principle or a point that I'm talking about. But if I'm just there talking about myself because I want my clients to listen to my life story, that's unethical, and I'm going to make you pay for it, right? And so
It's a bad deal.
I think that's really problematic. So we're really, if any experience any self-disclosing experience, and I try to be a kind of what you see is what you get person. Like I'm pretty transparent. And so if there's something in my life and I feel like, or something from my experience that I feel could help them, and I do it purely with that intent. This is not about me. This is purely about you and your journey. And I think maybe this might help you, and maybe it will, and maybe it won't. But it's always with that intent. I think that can be very appropriate.
Mm-hmm. And I like what Scott said a moment ago too, that appropriate, human response and connection is important. If the client feels, and I get this from my clients all the time, they want to know that we're human. And if we only function as some kind of, sterile sounding board or whatever, that doesn't work either. There has to be that classic therapeutic relationship where we feel a connection. Over the years, my children have sometimes, heard me tell stories, and I'll say, well, a friend of mine was saying this the other day, and they'll say, Mom, we know your clients are your friends. I'm like, well, yes. Now, not outside in an inappropriate, we don't go shopping together, we don't go bowling together, but there is a connection that is felt there that needs to be a part of a therapeutic process. If you don't feel comfortable, if you don't feel the warmth from the therapist, you probably want to go somewhere else. But if as has been said very well, if the client or the therapist is talking about their own life and their own problems in your time, that is completely inappropriate. It's about you and your time.
Let me add just one real piece. All the common factors research and what really helps affect change in the therapeutic relation or in therapy is, a huge percentage. As much as they can quantify it, at least 30% of what they attribute to the kinds of change that happen in therapy happen by virtue of the therapeutic relationship alone. Of the therapeutic relationship alone. And then 30% is like modality. And there's a lot of variation in approach and modality. And then 40% is like completely external random factors, right?
That's true.
Have nothing to do with therapy. And so, but in that 30%, that's the therapeutic relationship. And I've been on the other side of this too. I've seen at least 2 therapists, and for various reasons. And the one that was most healing and most effective for me was the relationship with the therapist who was very vulnerable in therapy. He was very authentic and real with me. The one where I felt like I was talking to just a cognition, he was just very kind of heady and was just telling me the data that I needed to know in order to do the right things. It felt kind of empty to me. So the more vulnerable, intimate relationship that I had with a therapist was the most healing one that I had.
Dave, you were going to say something.
To me, therapy is when a person invites me into their personal life journey. And so I walk alongside them, I walk with them. Sometimes I may be walking in front, sometimes I may be walking behind. And I'm using, my job as a therapist is to bring to bear, to use all internal resources to aid that person on his journey. And so sometimes that's going to be my memory of what Eric Erickson taught, or it may be my own life experience, and sometimes it's going to be the whisperings of the Spirit, and sometimes it's going to be just my love, the authentic, genuine love that I feel for that person that just overflows. And so as a therapist, I am the instrument in the room as I walk with him. I'm not the change factor, I'm the instrument. And so it's whatever it takes to help that person on his journey, not mine.
And I think finding a good therapist is a little like dating, And if you can interview your therapist ahead of time and somehow find out a little bit about their experience and where they're coming from and what they're all about and how much experience they've had with the issue that you want to talk about, that's a great idea. And, you just want to...
Not all therapists are right for the same issues. I mean, there are a lot of different factors that go into trying to find the right therapist that is going to fit either at this time in my life or this particular issue. Gender can make a difference. I mean, there's so many different factors. So it is kind of, it's not just, people will say, well, I did therapy, kind of been there, done that. Well, not all therapists are created equal, and not all therapeutic approaches are created equal. And so sometimes someone might have a very, very fundamentally different experience with different therapists or at different points in their life or using a different therapeutic approach.
Yeah, just be an informed consumer. That's very important.
Richard.
Well, you don't have that luxury with ecclesiastical leaders, I think.
Can't shop around for a bishop?
Some people do. But I think there's an analog to that. I mean, one can relate principles that ought to work in people's lives, but if there's some testimony that can be borne about a particular principle, and then there's always the other, the world is full of dumb bishop stories. Only problem is bishops can't give their side of it, so it's a little difficult that way. But rather than, I think, leave with a perception of this ecclesiastical leader, they gave me this terrible bit of advice, or they weren't open. I'm sure that they're trying to love and understand, and if you would return the favor by help me understand what you mean. Let me tell you what I hear you saying. Try to open that interchange and help them out. And sometimes what you hear is not at all what was intended. And so we just have to be careful.
Good points. The next question is a little similar, so I think we can deal with it fairly quickly. SSA is one of many issues I face. I can't find a therapist who can grasp all of them as a whole. After a dozen therapists, each gets only part of it. How can I find someone? My first response is that I've heard many people say that a therapist took them to a certain point and they were helpful, and then they kind of outgrew that therapist and they needed to find another therapist who helped them with another element. That can happen too. One therapist may not fit all your needs, but maybe will take you to a point that's helpful, and then you have met those goals, those therapeutic goals, and you move toward another therapeutic goal with another therapist. What do you think?
I think there's a little bit of a fallacy underlying that question. And I think I think anyone sitting here could help an individual work through many different issues. It's just that, is the individual willing to discuss those issues? And is the therapist willing to open up enough and be teachable enough or hear clearly what the client's trying to say? But again, it's not that therapists really specialize all that much, or that we need to have experience with all those different issues. I think if there's a relationship of trust, and if that therapeutic relationship is deep enough, frankly, I can't imagine somebody not being able to share those. You do go through different phases, and sometimes you even need to drop out of therapy for a little while and then come back later and deal with another issue when you as a client are ready to deal with it. But I've watched David Matheson, for instance, deal with numerous different issues with clients. Because of the depth of that relationship, I don't know that you have that much problem, do you, moving from one issue to another with a client, as long as they're with you?
I think that the wise therapist is also going to realize that many of the presentations of a problem are all similar, that the origins of different issues that you have come from the same place. And so in that regard, the good therapist is really going to be able to say, yes, let's listen and talk about the content of what is going on, but let's look at the process. What is it about you, fundamentally, that creates the multitude of issues you think you have?
That's what I was going to say. I endorse that.
Richard?
Well, from a slightly different perspective, I think the same thing. All of those issues have a common element, and that's the person. So I think my response would be, let's suspend issues for a while. I want to talk about you. Where are you, and what is, what's going on? Where do you want to be? And the issues will rise and fall.
And quite frankly, most of us who are in this business actually love problems. Big, hairy problems, bring them on. It's just fun. Well, that's a bad way to put it.
I think there's also some, when working with clients, everybody has issues, and I really loved Aaron Caldwell's comment where everybody needs therapy or something like that. I have a testimony of therapy. I think everybody could use a lot of it. And I think that, but there's a difference between having issues and having mental illness, in my judgment, and where someone has like psychiatric disorders or things like that. And I think that, like, you have a general practitioner as opposed to a specialist. If we're talking, if we're talking medical issues, I think you have general practitioners that can do a lot of things in working with people, but then there are some issues that you just need a specialist, and so they refer out. And I think if I'm working with someone, there might be certain psychiatric issues or areas of mental illness that I know that within my level of education and experience I'm not qualified to address, and ethically I need to refer them out. And so I think being conscious of the variety of issues that we're dealing. Someone may come in for same-sex attraction, or they're feeling distress around their sexuality. Through some assessment, I may assess that that's the least of what they're dealing with, right? And so I may need to kind of sort that out with them, and then even refer them to someone that can help them deal with maybe some more serious psychiatric issues.
There were a few different questions that came in concerning vocabulary, asking how important is the vocabulary that we use, whether we call it homosexuality or same-gender attraction or same-sex attraction. What is the difference? Does it make that big a difference?
I think it depends on who you're talking to. Everybody is able to parse these terms in their own favor, possibly, or you can start parsing them to the extent that you make the situation so complex there is no solution to it. But on the other hand, it may make a difference. It depends on what you're hanging on. I've got to have this term in order to make sense of it. Well, then let's explore that. But I do think it's something that ought to be talked about. If we were naming categories and you have so much of this or so much of that, then it would be important to set that out, because the categories would need to be labeled and you get them there. But if it's all a matter of what you're doing and what it means to be a human being who can do things like that, then the vocabulary isn't important. So I think it depends on the person's experience, what they use the vocabulary for, what it means to them.
Like in a society as ours is now, where some vocabulary exonerates us from any responsibility, like that, we're like, I have this problem and it owns me and I can't do anything about it, as opposed to if I'm just using that vocabulary to describe what I feel and I have every intention of taking responsibility for my life. I think that's a good point. Ty?
One piece I want to add to that is words do not have power or meaning in and of themselves. Words have power and meaning in what words are by definition, language is by definition socially constructed. It's something that we have decided in language and in relationship that this word means this thing. So we're going to use this word to represent this thing. Words are always symbols. And they don't have substance in and of themselves. They always represent something else. And so I need to be clear that the word that I'm using is communicating the idea. Words always represent ideas. They're symbols to represent ideas. And if I'm trying to communicate something, I'm not communicating a word, I'm communicating an idea. And so I need to make sure that the words that I'm using are communicating the ideas that I want to communicate. And on a kind of
Could I just interrupt you there?
No. Has no meaning to me.
Exactly.
Right.
Words are highly symbolic, and what he's saying is exactly true. They're just symbols, and we need to make sure we got the same idea.
So on a level of, even though the branding of my professional licensure is marriage and family therapy, I think of myself more as a kind of a human ecologist, and I kind of the nuts and bolts of the human experience. Like I love really deconstructing and looking at what makes humans humans, and why we experience differently things, and the difference between feelings and emotions, and where that comes from, and how we can affect change, and thoughts and cognitions. And we were having a conversation before about one of the problems of same-sex attraction is that I see somebody that's beautiful and I'm attracted. Are they just aesthetically beautiful to me? Am I attracted because I think they're beautiful? I think men are beautiful. I think women are beautiful. I think humans are beautiful. I love humans. Like, I love people. And but that's different than, and there's nothing wrong with same-sex attraction. And so we have this word that doesn't really communicate often what we need to address. And even homosexuality has some of its own limitations. And on a real level, if we really want to break it down, we need to talk about the erotic component. It's the eroticization that's going on that we need to look at and figure out what's going on there. Because otherwise, there may be elements of same-sex attraction. There's attachment injury. There's emotional starvation. There's isolation. There's all of these other things that are independent from same-sex attraction. And if I'm emotionally isolated in my life, same-sex attraction is not my problem. It's probably the message that I need to be listening to. It's telling me something. It's like hunger. I don't want to just shut off my hunger. I need to listen to my hunger. I need to respect my hunger and do what my hunger is telling me to do. I just need to get food that is going to be nutrient-rich and not, run to McDonald's or something like that.
Could I follow up on that just for a minute? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If we're really going to address the subject properly, we would have to have so many hyphenated words. So we'd have to have same-sex attraction, but we need to have, and same-sex eroticization, but we need to have same-sex envy, same-sex disaffiliation, same-sex incongruity, same-sex idealization, same-sex idolization, same-sex or idolatry. I mean, there are so many aspects to it, and when they all get clumped together in the term same-sex attraction, that's where I think that we have a difficult time.
We conflate them, and we conflate the good with those things that might be a problem. I need meaningful relationships with the same sex. I need love and intimacy in my relationships with the same sex, right? And so if I conflate that with envy or lust or other things, then all of a sudden I'm not talking about anything that's actually meaningful or is going to be helpful.
I think this plays off that a little bit, that there is one danger to words. There's that old joke from years ago, go in to see a psychiatrist, and he says, well, I'm afraid you have schizophrenia, and he says, oh, thank heaven, I thought I was crazy. There's a real danger in words because we have a tendency in our culture, and it goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, that we invent a word to name something, and then that thing becomes real, and it develops a power in our lives.
You mean that thing meaning the word becomes real?
Yeah. The idea that we invented the word to describe becomes a reality, and it shouldn't. I would put in that category sexuality. I don't think sexuality exists. It's an empty word. It's an abstraction to describe things I do. I don't think that attraction is a real word. It's a description of what I'm doing. It doesn't name a thing. There's no thing out there, so we tend to create with words, if we're not careful, a universe full of powerful abstractions that are somehow producing things in us, and it shifts us away from what we're doing, how we're putting the world together, how we're creating. So words are essential to communicate, but if we give them too much reality as if the thing they're aimed at really exists, we have to be careful, I think.
And I want to add to that too, because there's a whole...
I'm just going to suggest, let's kind of wrap this part up. No, but please finish it, Ty.
And this idea, I mean, that's a really powerful idea, because we have a language, and language is so strong and it's so universally accepted on some things that we just kind of take it as it is because we think that it exists because everybody believes it. And I mean, there's a whole field of literature on the idea that the idea of sexual orientation is a social construction. Mm-hmm. Not that we're not really attracted or don't experience some real issues, but we've created this category that we call sexual orientation that's defined by gender only, and the way that we've created it, we just kind of take it at face value. It exists, right? And I think that and it exists because everybody believes it, and they believe it because it exists, and we get into this kind of circular stuff. And so we really have to be able to kind of perspective take and stand out and see that some of the ways that we've constructed things, we've created our own problems, and then we wonder why we're stuck in the problem. And I'm not talking about individually, I'm talking culturally we do this. This is something we're all kind of victim to on a lot of levels.
I really think that's a powerful idea, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Richard, and your comments on that, Ty. I think that that's very true, that sometimes we can talk ourselves into a lot of things as a society and even as individuals because of concepts that are shared so glibly in a way and without much thought about how it can remove us from the essential about what choices or what I do or what I need to do. We are going to end this session a little bit early. You know, we've got some weather concerns. We also just want to be respectful of time. So I would like to have each of the panelists make kind of a closing statement. Again, let's try to keep this to 2 minutes or less. I know that's hard, but please make a closing statement about what you'd like this group to hear.
Want to start here?
Sure.
I think that our intellectual culture and our culture at large has neglected to get to the heart of some very important issues, like what it means to be a human being, what it means to be an eternal agent, an eternal uncreated intelligence, what agency means, so you don't just call it out of the closet when you have to make a choice, but it is your essential activity in life. And religiously, I think we're coping with same-sex attraction and these problems about as well as we can, given that we're closely wedded to the same kind of theology and the same kind of categories that the Christian world at large holds and that our culture holds. But if we're really going to make progress, I think we have to go much deeper than that. We have to re-understand what it means to be a human being, give up those cultures, be truer to the insights of the restored gospel, and don't take those categories as reality. We got to start over and understand this in some fundamentally different ways.
Thank you.
I think what I hope everyone in here will take home with them is that we are all children of God and that we're all invited to go back home, regardless of what we've done. No one has done something that separates you from the atonement. You really can take advantage of that. You really do deserve to be happy and peaceful and have hope in your life. And if there's something standing in the way of that, we simply need to help you reconnect. We're all headed toward the tree of life. The mist of darkness confuses all of us, but there's always a power there to bring you home if you'll just be open to it. And I think if we can just help each other all do that and go there, there's really no need to be in despair. There's always a way.
Attraction is a feeling over which we don't have a lot of control. It just sort of shows up, and there's a whole bunch of different reasons for it. Love is an emotion. What we give and sacrifice and serve for is where we love. And I think that love is born of service, sacrifice, giving, all that kind of stuff. Whatever you give your life to, you will love.
One thought and one experience. The thought, the purpose of therapy is, in my view, is to help the individual unblock so they can move forward to the next phase. The experience, not that long ago, a few months back, I was given just a gift from God. It was a mini revelation, you might call it. For just a moment, He privileged me by showing me sort of the edge of the extent and the intensity of His love for you. I already knew He loved me. It wasn't about me. It was the love that He feels toward you. And it was sweet and profound and intense. And I think that I didn't have the capacity to bear the passion and the intensity of that love. But it put in me a desire to somehow communicate to you how much he passionately wants you back, and how passionately he misses you, loves you, and how he will do anything you will allow him to redeem you and bring you back to him. And how passionately he wants you to receive everything that he has to give you. Not a telestial self, not a terrestrial self, but to receive everything that he has.
I've heard it said that repentance is for the past, hope is for the future, and the Holy Ghost is for the present, the here and now. Because it's only in the here and now that he's able to influence us. And I'd just like to add that there are many paths that lead to the door where Christ is waiting for us to knock. And that each of our paths is unique, individual, and valuable. So that no matter how you're getting to Christ is not as important as whether you get there or not. And so my hope is that we're able to realize that our life experiences are equal and they're valid and they have value. Never forget that.
Robert Millett once made the comment that the call to Christ is not a call to be good, it's a call to be holy. And that, and I think I've said before in other forums that I also believe the call to Christ is not a call to be heterosexual, it's a call to be holy. And and sometimes we get too focused into this whole like gay straight dichotomies. And where I think all of our experiences can be consecrated to our holiness, and you've heard before earlier today how many people have come to truly experience this as a blessing, and I'm one of those people. And truly one of the greatest blessings. I know I wouldn't be where I am, and I know I wouldn't be who I am had it not been for these experiences that I've had. And I embrace them to that effect. And at the same time, my desire for holiness and godliness is to be a godlike being. I want to become as God is. I want to be a being who creates and who brings order to chaos and order out of disorder and that kind of thing. And wherever in my life I need to mature and to grow and to create order from disorder, whether that's in my thoughts, the way I experience my emotions, the things that I'm doing, whatever that is, the call to Christ and God and this invitation into holiness is an invitation to maturity in God, and I think therapy, often the therapeutic process, is an invitation to look inward and to become conscious of those areas that maybe do block us or keep us stuck, or areas where we're not conscious of things that could hold us back. And I think we all have our blind spots, and we don't think twice about contacting a financial advisor to help us with our taxes, because I don't know how to do taxes, and I also often don't know how to do human very well either. So I consult somebody who knows how to do human a little bit better than I do. And I think that's the beauty of therapy, is just learning how to do human a little bit better. For people who have more experience, who've they've looked at the nuts and bolts of what makes human healthy, or how to do healthy human. And so at the end of the day, I think that it's a blessing and a privilege to be able to look inward at where our opportunities for growth are, and not get caught up in what can easily become a red herring of, well, it's not going to make me straight, quote unquote. And because then it's like, well, I'm not going to pursue growth or anything, because it's not going to look like what somebody else thinks it should look like, or it's funny, just as a quick anecdote, so David's book was just published, and somebody like posted it on this kind of more liberal leaning blog thread, and someone said, without knowing anything about the book, said, we all know it's false because science has proven blah, 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 right? And I thought, first of all, science hasn't proven anything that you just said. And second of all, you've all heard the quip that the Book of Mormon's like the only book that you're allowed to have an opinion of without reading it. Well, like, it's kind of the same idea. I thought, well, let's actually maybe take an opportunity to read what he has to say. Because what you're saying, I've read the book, and what you're saying is not what he's saying, right? And I thought, just don't get caught up in these red herrings that limit opportunities to explore ideas, to explore opportunities for growth, that could actually be very rich and very rewarding.
Thank you so much. If you'll forgive me, I'm going to take a moment and leave a couple of thoughts myself. I've really appreciated all who've participated today. It's been wonderful for me, and I always am uplifted and feel the spirit at events like this, where they really are driven by love and a desire to be helpful and a desire to connect with people who may need our support and help. I want to say that whoever you are and wherever you are, there's a place for you in the kingdom of God. It's an all-inclusive kingdom. It is for all of God's children. And we talked about comparisons a moment ago. You know, what's on the cover of the magazines? Well, don't make the mistake of comparing yourself with anybody who is here today either. We're all in different places. We all need to move forward. God isn't so concerned about position as he is about direction. And it's not really about speed, it's about movement. And sometimes that movement might be crawling on our hands and knees, but we're moving. And if we're going the right direction, God's going to be there and help us with that. If we'll reach up and invite him into our lives, he'll help us. You know, we do need to change. Everybody needs to change. We're here to change. And there's help for that. We don't have to do it alone. Sometimes it's pretty overwhelming. I know when I was an undergrad in college a long time ago, before I was married, I really got into the scriptures. And I wanted to be like Jesus Christ. Well, I still do. But then it took the case, kind of a form of frenzy. I wanted to not be impatient. I wanted to not be unkind. I wanted to always be benevolent. I wanted to always think pure thoughts. And, you know, I didn't quite get to the OCD stage, but I was on my way. And I stopped before that point, but I realized the more I wanted to be like that, I was sort of beating myself bloody. And that wasn't the goal. I remembered hearing all my life about the Savior. But I guess I kept thinking, well, yeah, there's the Savior. I didn't realize he was for me, and that here I was trying to swim to the shore against the current and getting further and further away the harder I tried, and all I needed to do was reach for Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ could pull me in. I couldn't do it by myself. I wasn't supposed to do it by myself. We're not supposed to do it by ourselves. We have a Savior, and he is mighty to save. We just need to give him something to work with. We need to open the door and bring him in, and then we need to let him decide where we change first. I've found that to be so helpful my entire life. When I didn't know what to do next, I prayed. What shall I do next? How shall I address this problem in the next step? Where shall I go to find help? To the next place or the next person. And I've always found that answer. As was said in one of our panels earlier today, sometimes that answer doesn't come when we want it to. It doesn't mean the heavens aren't speaking to us. Maybe we just need to show we really mean it and we can be patient. One of my sons was recently making a study of the concept of patience and the doctrine of patience. And this may sound so redundant, but it meant a lot to him and it meant a lot to me when he said, patience must be really important to God. Whatever else the answer is, it always includes patience. Let's be patient in our journey. Let's be patient. And the Lord will work with us if we'll give him time and give him ourselves. I also wanted to say that this morning, as I was praying about today, and I took a moment in my scriptures, and this verse came to my attention, and I thought I would share it today. It's from section 105, verse 35. There has been a day of calling, but the time has come for a day of choosing. I'm going to repeat that. There has been a day of calling, but the time has come for a day of choosing. And let those be chosen that are worthy. It's a process. It's not a race. There shouldn't be anxiety around it. There should be determination around it, a commitment around it. And we'll find what we need. The Lord is on our side. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
There's really not much I can add. There's so much that has been said. But yes, 12 years ago, I did have a young man come to me, and I was serving as a bishop of a young single adult ward. And I had never, before that experience, spoken with a single person who actually experienced same-sex attraction about it. I knew literally nothing about the subject. And when he through his tears, described his struggles to me. All of my preconceived notions about that issue melted away. And I sat back in my chair and I said, Michael, I don't know what to say because I don't know much about this issue. But I testify to you that the Lord loves you. And as your bishop, I love you too. Let's go find some answers together. David, on our panel, Matheson, mentioned that he had been shown a glimpse of the Lord's love. Bishops experience this, not because they're necessarily qualified to, because it's an essential part of their calling, and the Lord gives them this love, even sometimes when they don't deserve it. I felt that love. That love is expressed powerfully in the Psalm of Nephi in 2 Nephi 4. Let me read it to you. He hath filled me with his love, even unto the consuming of my flesh. This is the love that David Matheson was talking about. It's the love of the Lord. As a bishop, I felt that love, and I felt that if I would have opened up the window of that love and I were exposed to its complete intensity, that it would melt me away, that I could not withstand it. Well, fast forward 12 years, and through a journey of trying to understand more about this issue, through years of speaking to individuals and organizing conferences and publishing books and reading others' books and discussing this issue in so many ways, I have come back to where I began, in that very office with that very young man. In some ways, perhaps I never really left. I know that the Lord loves him. And he loves each of you. And he loves me. And so in closing, can I just say that through all of this, coming back to the place of the beginning, this church that we call the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is God's true church upon the earth. We are led by living prophets. And I bear witness, after thousands of hours of study and meeting with therapists and psychologists, and they do so much good in the world. Yes, they do. But can I tell you that after thousands of hours of research, I come back to the place of the beginning, and it is God's love. God's love is manifest through him. And his commandments are an expression of that love. He gives us living prophets. And if we are careful students of their words, I bear you my witness because I have studied their words very intensely. They know about this issue, and they are laying down very careful guideposts for us to follow. And I promise you, if you read their words and you follow them, you will find the place to go. These therapists will help you. But never forget, as Elder Oak said, and it's printed on the back of your program, that the greatest source for all emotional suffering is found in the atonement of Jesus Christ. Good therapy can help you access that, but it is not the atonement. It is the atonement of Jesus Christ that makes changes in us. If any of you have struggled, never forget the words of a good friend of mine who said, "We can never sink lower than the arms of the atonement can lift us up." And another friend who said, "Does the Lord lift us up, or do we crawl up out of whatever hole we are in?" The Lord does lift us up, but invariably it is while we are in the act of climbing. May you ever fill yourselves with the living water, the word of the Lord, as it is expressed in the Scriptures, and through his living oracles. Those are expressions of God's love for us. I bear you my witness that the gospel of Jesus Christ is true, that his atonement is real. He will help you. Come to him. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.